Hello and welcome to Simply Balanced, the podcast where we dive into, all things balanced. I'm your host, Taylor Grasso, a registered dietitian with a passion to helping you find your unique balance girl aesthetic in this often hectic world. Each episode will explore different facets of living a balanced life, whether it's unraveling the latest nutrition trends, discovering mindful eating strategies, or discussing tips for a balanced lifestyle that fits your routine. Balance isn't about perfection, it's about making choices that feel right for you, nurturing your body and mind, and enjoying life's simple pleasures. So whether you're sipping your morning coffee, heading out for a walk, or winding down for the evening, I'm thrilled to have you join me. So let's dive in and talk, all things balanced. Hello, besties, and welcome back to another episode of Simply Balanced. As always, I am so glad that you are here, and thank you so much for listening. This week's topic is one that I feel like I've been talking more and more about on social media because I feel like it's the most crucial and fundamental component to nutrition that not enough people are talking about, and that is blood sugar balance. Like, when I really truthfully think about what balanced nutrition looks like and how to support a high-functioning metabolism and specifically support hormones, which is something that we're hearing a lot about on social media these days, especially with what feels like a rise in PCOS. I think that one of the most crucial things that you can learn is blood sugar balance and understanding the way in which carbohydrates benefit your body. But what we're not talking about enough is the different types of carbohydrates and how we can eat them in a variety of different ways in order to balance out our blood sugar levels, support our metabolism, and also support our hormones. So that's what we're going to dive into today. And I am so excited to talk about this topic because, like I said, it's literally one of my favorite things in the world to talk about because I think it's the crucial, fundamental component of nutrition that a lot of us are missing out on. Okay, so let's first just dive into what actually is blood sugar, because I think that there's a lot of misinformation on the internet from what I've seen, and there's also a lot of misinformation about blood sugar spikes, what causes blood sugar spikes, that blood sugar spikes are quote unquote bad. So what actually is blood sugar and what is blood glucose? Because those two things are interchangeable. You might hear it written out as BS or BG. This is also associated with an A1C, which is something that you might be familiar with if you've ever been diagnosed with prediabetes, gestational diabetes, or type 2 diabetes. We can also talk about insulin resistance. When we talk about blood sugar or blood glucose, these are all really common terminologies where you might hear blood sugar or blood glucose a little bit more often. But essentially what happens is when we eat a carbohydrate source, does not matter what type of carbohydrate source, okay? It could be candy, it could be bread, it could be fruit, it could literally be any carbohydrate source. In its simplest form, it's going to break down into glucose. And the reason that I say any carbohydrate in its simplest form is going to break down into glucose is because I oftentimes see people saying sugar is bad, carbs are bad. Carbs and sugar are interchangeable terms. They're the exact same thing on a super basic level. But the differentiating factor of the different types of carbohydrates is the way in which they impact your blood sugar, which is what we're going to get into in this episode. So when you eat that carbohydrate, then you're going to release glucose or sugar into your bloodstream. When that blood sugar hits the bloodstream, it's going to signal your pancreas to release something called insulin, which is another term that you might be familiar with. It's talked about a lot online. But it's a hormone that, like I said, is released by the pancreas. And I like to describe it as the fact that it kind of works like a capturer. It goes in and helps the blood sugar or the sugar actually get into the cells where it's needed. So your brain alone uses 130 grams of carbohydrates per day. Your red blood cells can actually only use glucose as a form of energy. And then two really big places where glucose is going to go and then actually get stored as something called glycogen is your muscle tissue and your liver tissue. And in your muscle tissue, it's going to primarily be utilized for exercise. So the larger or more muscle tissue you have, the more glucose that can be stored for usage for later exercise. It gets broken down, goes from glycogen down into something called ATP, which is then what we use for energy. And when we do high intensity exercise, so your heart rate's up a little bit higher, you're primarily going to use carbohydrates as your main energy source. And now when we think about that on a basic physiological level, it makes a lot of sense because when you're moving at a really fast or really intense pace, you need energy really, really quickly. Because our body's primary source of fuel is carbohydrates, it's the easiest one for our body to utilize and convert to energy. The higher your heart rate and the quicker that you need energy, the more that you're going to rely on carbohydrates for energy because it's the easiest one to convert over. Now, when we talk about exercise, we're almost always going to be using both carbohydrates and fat as a source of fuel. But the lower the intensity, the more fat you're using, the higher the intensity, the more carbohydrates you're using. And that's because fat takes a really long time to convert over to energy. When I say a really long time, that's kind of in comparison to carbs because carbs are super, super quick. So fat just takes longer. When you're moving at a lower intensity, you don't need energy nearly as quickly. So that's why we can rely more on fat, less on carbs. But as that energy or intensity increases, we're going to rely more so on those carbohydrate sources. Okay, I literally have so much that I want to talk about, so we are going to jump right into this. So first, I want to give a little example of what blood sugar and blood glucose actually are, because I think that there's a lot of misinformation on the internet when we talk about blood sugar or blood glucose spikes. So when you eat any carbohydrate, it does not matter, bread, candy, fruit, all of it in its simplest form is going to break down into glucose. Now, the internet really likes to get mad at me when I say this because they're like, oh, so you're saying that candy and whole wheat bread are the same thing. No, I'm not saying that candy and whole wheat bread are the same thing. They impact our blood sugar differently, which is what we're going to get into in this episode. But in their most basic and simplest form, all carbohydrates are going to break down into sugar. That's why I always find it really funny when people on social media are like, I have cut out sugar, but I'm still eating complex carbohydrates. I'm like, well, technically, you're still eating sugar. You're just not eating added sugar, which we will get a little bit into like the difference between those two things because that's the main thing that impacts our blood sugar levels. But you eat this carbohydrate and in its simplest form, it's going to turn into glucose. And then that glucose or sugar, interchangeable terms, are going to enter your bloodstream. So you might see this as BS or BG, blood sugar or blood glucose. And once that sugar hits the bloodstream, it's going to signal your pancreas to release something called insulin. I like to think of insulin as a little transporter or like a little capturer. It basically goes and it helps that sugar actually get into the cells that your body needs to utilize it for. So like, for example, our brain uses 130 grams of glucose per day. So if you ever tracked macros or calories and you were eating under 130 grams of carbohydrates per day, you were not even providing your brain with enough energy. If you felt brain foggy, if you felt like you couldn't concentrate, you felt fatigued, that was probably your brain signaling you for the fact that, hey, I need some glucose. Please give me some glucose. Your red blood cells, the only form of energy that they can use is glucose. And then the other two storage points for glucose are going to be your muscle tissue and your liver tissue. And your muscle tissue and liver tissue are going to store them as glycogen. Glycogen can then be converted into energy for later use. So when we're talking about the muscle glycogen, typically that is utilized for exercise. So when we think about how we exercise, if we're exercising at a high intensity, we are going to utilize carbohydrates as our primary source of fuel. Now, the reason for that is because, like I said, it's your preferred source of energy. Your body is able to convert it to something called ATP, which is energy, really, really quickly. And think about when you're moving at a high intensity pace, right? Like you're sprinting, you're doing a HIIT interval class, you're doing circuit training, you need energy really quickly. So that's why we're going to rely more on carbohydrates as that primary source of fuel, then we're going to rely on fat. Now, when we talk about lower intensity exercise, we're going to more heavily rely on fat versus carbohydrates. Because we're moving at a slower pace and our body doesn't need energy nearly as quickly, we have that time available to us to convert the fat over to energy. Now, you're never going to be exclusively using fat or carbohydrates. There's going to be a point where you're most definitely using mostly fat or mostly carbs, depending on where your heart rate is and the intensity of the exercise, but you're never going to be using one or the other exclusively. It's always going to be a combination of the two. So when we talk about having more muscle mass and some of the benefits that come along with resistance training is when you have more muscle, you can actually store more of this glycogen for energy usage, which is important because we'll talk about what happens when we have too high of circulating sugar levels in our bloodstream. If our muscle is able to go and utilize some of this energy and store it for later use, we're going to pull more of that out of our bloodstream. And now we go over to the liver, which is the second storage point for glycogen. The liver's primary function with glycogen is to make sure that it's giving us glucose in between our meals if we're not eating in between our meals and while we're sleeping at night. Because you think about that, right? Like if you're sleeping 8, 9, 10 hours, which like if you're sleeping that long, I love that for you. I try to get like 7 to 8 most nights, but think about how long you're going without any sort of food or nutrition. Your blood sugar can drop. So your liver is responsible for maintaining homeostasis and balancing out those blood sugar levels with the stored glycogen that is in the liver. Now, if we have fully reserved our tanks in terms of our muscles are full of glycogen and our liver is full of glycogen, then the third storage place that carbohydrates will go to is our fat or adipose tissue. Now, I just want to make it very clear that pretty much any macronutrient, not pretty much, any macronutrient that is eaten in excess or calories that are eaten in excess are eventually going to be stored as adipose tissue if our body doesn't have a usage point for them. Now, we're going to get into that a little bit more because I know I briefly touched on how the muscle tissue having more muscle mass is able to hold more glycogen. But I also want to talk a little bit about the roles of glucose and insulin, because these were two terms that I mentioned when I was talking about blood sugar balance overall. So like I said, one of the primary roles of glucose is that it's a simple sugar and it serves as the main source of energy for a variety of the body's cells. And then it can also be stored in the liver and muscles as a form of glycogen for use when blood glucose levels are low or during physical activity. Not to mention that the concentration of glucose in the bloodstream, or our blood sugar level, is tightly regulated by the body to ensure that the cells receive a steady energy supply without damaging tissues from excessive sugar levels. Because that is ultimately what can happen, is if we have too high of blood sugar levels, which is why a lot of people talk about avoiding blood sugar spikes. But what they are not mentioning is that a blood sugar quote unquote spike is normal after you eat a carbohydrate. Your blood sugar should rise after you eat a carbohydrate. What we're trying to avoid is chronic spikes and chronic falls that are very rapid. Like you can kind of think about going up and down really, really quickly versus having more of a steady rise that's then extended out over a period of time and then slowly drops off afterwards. That's more so what we are looking for. And a lot of that is tied to the glycemic index of the certain foods that we are eating, or complex versus simple carbohydrates. I shouldn't say versus because I don't want to make this like a competition thing between the two, because remember, there is no morally good or bad food. There is more nutrient dense food and slightly less nutrient dense food. When we talk about more complex carbohydrates, whole grains, beans and legumes, fruits and vegetables, these types of carbohydrates are going to contain protein and fiber. Protein and fiber take longer to digest than a carbohydrate by itself. So what that is going to do is actually slow down the release of that sugar or that glucose coming from the carbohydrate into the bloodstream. This has a lower glycemic index, meaning that it impacts your blood sugar less. You're not getting a super quick spike and a super quick fall. Now, when we think about our more simple carbohydrates, this is things like honey or maple syrup. We've also got like just table sugar, pastries, soda, candy. Some of those more simple carbohydrates, they don't have a lot of protein and fiber. They're basically just a straight up carbohydrate. That doesn't make them bad. It just means that when they're eaten in isolation or by themselves, they have a higher glycemic index, meaning that they're going to impact our blood sugar much more significantly than those complex carbohydrates. Now, what we can do is focus on emphasizing more complex carbohydrates in our diet, and when we are choosing to eat more simple carbohydrates, learning how to pair them with protein, fat, and or fiber. Because as I mentioned, what is that main difference between the complex and the simple carbohydrates? It's that complex still contains a little bit more fiber and a little bit more protein, and that slows down the release of that sugar into the bloodstream. Now, when we're talking about that from the simple carb, it doesn't have as much protein and fiber. That's why we want to pair it with other protein, fat, and or fiber sources in order to help slow down the release of that blood sugar. Like an example that I've given recently, if you're eating a whole grain or you're wanting to eat candy, right? It's a simple carbohydrate. pairing that with something like whole grain popcorn, where you're going to be getting some dietary fiber, which is a little bit more of a complex carbohydrate, and then some nuts. So whether that be pistachios, cashews, or almonds, and then tossing a little bit of your candy in there as well. That is going to have much more of a positive impact on your blood sugar levels, and you're probably going to feel a lot more satisfied from it, especially if you're reaching for this for like a mid-afternoon snack. You're going to feel more full and satisfied because of the way in which that glucose is entering the bloodstream at a slower rate. Your insulin has more time to get it into the cells where it needs to go. Now, I've mentioned the word insulin a lot as well, which is something that you hear on social media, specifically related to insulin resistance, I feel like. So I want to talk a little bit more about what insulin actually is and what it does for the body. So insulin is a hormone that's produced by the beta cells of the pancreas. Its primary role is to help to manage our blood glucose levels. So when a glucose level rises, which remember I said that's totally normal after a meal, insulin is then released from that pancreas and is helped to transport glucose from the bloodstream into the cells where it's used for energy or stored for later use as energy. The other thing about insulin is that it actually helps to facilitate the uptake of glucose by the cells. So like I mentioned, primarily those muscle and fat cells. So it helps to signal the cells to increase the number of glucose transporters on their surface, which allows for the glucose to actually get in there and enter it. So like I said, when I explain it, I try to keep it super simple and be like, it's basically a capturer and transporter to get it into the cells. But on a scientific level, that's essentially what's happening. It's increasing the amount of glucose transporters on the cell's surface so that the glucose can actually enter into the cell and the cell can then use that for energy. How fucking cool are our bodies, by the way? Like when you really start to break all of this down and think about the way in which your body actually utilizes energy and the ways in which your body benefits from different types of energies, like that is so cool to think about the fact that your body just knows how to do this. It's incredible. And then it also plays a role in fat metabolism. So it can promote the storage of fat in adipose tissue by inhibiting the breakdown of fat and encouraging fat synthesis. So like I mentioned, anything that's eaten in excess, because I don't want us to automatically be like, oh, see, carbs make you fat, because that's what everybody likes to say, but that is absolutely not true. Any macronutrient that's eaten in excess, where our body has more calories than is necessary, is going to end up being stored as adipose tissue. But like we said, we want to make sure that we're getting those muscle and liver storage full first, and then it's going to be stored as adipose tissue, which is why emphasizing increasing muscle mass through resistance training can be so incredibly important for those with type 2 diabetes, those with insulin resistance, those with pre-diabetes. It has nothing to do with weight loss. It has to do with the habits that are associated with increasing your muscle mass, and not to mention that it can help lower your total A1C, it can help to lower your blood glucose and balance out your blood sugar levels. But gaining muscle and moving your body in ways that you enjoy has so many other benefits to you, and the amount of calories that you burn while doing it or the weight loss that comes with it are honestly the least important ones. Like when we truly think about it, I've said this before on a previous metabolism episode, but when we look at our total daily energy expenditure and the amount of calories that we burn in a day, exercise only contributes to 5% of that. And that's not to say that exercise is not important. It's to say that the caloric burn of exercise is the least important component of it, because this is a perfect example of one of the many ways that it can help to reduce the risk for chronic disease, but it can also help to improve mental and physical health, increase your flexibility and your mobility. It can literally do so many beneficial things for our body. And I'm going to keep repeating myself, but the caloric burn and the weight loss that are associated with it are the least important components to it. Now, I mentioned at the beginning of this episode that I believe that blood sugar, one of the most crucial things about it is that it actually helps to promote a high functioning metabolism and balance out our hormone levels. I guess I should say support our hormone levels, because I don't love that term balancing hormones. Like, what the fuck does that actually mean? So let's get into that a little bit more and talk about the ways in which blood sugar benefits us from a hormonal perspective. So two of the primary hormones that are involved with blood sugar balance, like I said, is insulin. So insulin helps to lower the blood sugar by helping cells absorb glucose. Another really important hormone that's involved in this process is called glucagon. Glucagon actually raises blood sugar levels by signaling the liver to release stored glucose. So like I mentioned, that's typically what happens while we're sleeping or while we're fasting, which we can get into why I don't love fasting, especially for us as females. I have a whole episode on that. But fasting, sleeping overnight, which is technically fasting, and then also in between your meals if you're skipping out on snacks. That is where your liver is going to release some of that glucose, and glucagon is going to be the primary signaler. So an imbalance in blood sugar can lead to disruptions between insulin and glucagon, not to mention that it can also increase two hormones that are related to stress, cortisol and epinephrine. This can potentially lead to insulin resistance, diabetes, and other metabolic disorders. So this is why I say that blood sugar is the foundation that a lot of us are missing when it comes to nutrition, because you'll hear this all the time that carbohydrates or sugar or overeating those things is what is leading to conditions like type 2 diabetes. That is absolutely not correct. The reason is because we're not understanding how to balance the different types of carbohydrates and keep our blood sugar levels in check throughout the course of the day. Instead, we're so fucking confused by diet culture that we're leaning into eating the littlest amount possible while working out the most that we possibly can and not actually supporting our metabolism or our body. So, like you can see here, an imbalance in just that insulin and glucagon can immediately lead to an increase in cortisol and epinephrine, those chronic stress hormones. And I've talked about this numerous times before, because I think another big misconception with cortisol, kind of like blood sugar, is that you're never supposed to have increases in cortisol. That's absolutely not true. There can most definitely be good stress on the body, one of those being physical activity. What we don't want is chronic elevated levels of cortisol over a long period of time. That's what can actually lead to inflammation within the body and pose a higher risk to some of these metabolic disorders. So as you can see here, a chronic imbalance in those blood sugar levels. So like I was mentioning, what this looks like is having your blood sugar going quickly up and quickly down throughout a lot of the day. I see this a lot in women that I work with who wake up and they drink coffee for breakfast, typically on a fasted stomach. Coffee is going to suppress their appetite and reduce their satisfaction and fullness cues. So then they're probably not going to eat until lunch. Typically we have like a salad with some chicken for lunch because that's what we're told to do. 3 o'clock rolls around, you're hitting that afternoon slump, and that's because your brain has hardly had any glucose for the entire day. So you feel brain foggy, you feel tired, you feel like you're going to crash. Typically what we'll do is reach for like a protein bar and or something like a Celsius or a coffee. And then you get home at night and all of a sudden you are a pantry raccoon and everything is on limits. Not on limits. Everything is available to you. You're wanting to eat every carbohydrate source in your pantry. That is a sign of imbalanced blood sugar levels. Another one that I hear a lot, I'm addicted to sugar. I'm constantly craving sugar. The likelihood is not that you're addicted to sugar, it's that you have a chronic imbalance in your blood sugar levels that is continuing to lead you to reach for sugar because your brain and your cells are not getting the correct amount or distribution of the macronutrients that you need to keep your blood sugar levels in check. So, we're going to dive a little bit deeper into hormonal balance as we go through this, but another key component to blood sugar level is your brain function. I've talked about this a lot, but your brain alone relies on 130 grams of carbohydrates for energy. Can your brain use other forms of energy? Yes, it can. Does it like to? No, it does not. Its primary source of energy is going to be glucose. And fluctuations in your blood sugar levels can lead to difficulties in concentration, mood swings, just general cognitive impairments. That's why I always make those videos about the 3 p.m. slump, because that 3 p.m. slump is not your body signaling you that you need more caffeine or that you need another energy drink. It's probably signaling you that you maybe haven't had enough glucose in the day and you need a snack, because that is truly where our energy comes from, is from food. When we think about what a calorie actually is on like a molecular scientific level, it's energy. And so when we think about getting energy, we oftentimes think about reaching for a caffeinated source, right? We don't think about reaching for food, but we need food. And by the way, your snack also needs to be more than 100 calories, because a 100-calorie snack is not going to keep you full or satisfied. And if you're like, Taylor, I just don't feel hungry throughout the day, I only feel hungry when I get home at night, that has a lot to do with these imbalanced blood sugar levels. And starting small with increasing the amount of balanced meals and power pack snacks that you're eating throughout your day, whether that's literally just simply starting with breakfast and moving upward up to lunch and up to your afternoon snack, but doing that slowly over time, you're going to start to notice an increase in those hunger and fullness cues, because there is a main reason that we're not necessarily feeling those. What we know about chronic restrictive dieting, which is also associated with an imbalance in blood sugar levels, because you think about it, when I described that day of eating, right? You're going to have your blood sugar levels down in the drain that earlier part of the day. And then that latter half of the day where you become a pantry raccoon, you're going to have your blood sugar levels probably spiking up and down through the roof, because you're reaching for highly palatable, more simple carbohydrates. Because you are so ravenous, it's really hard to be mindful in that moment. And I also like to say that, like, this is not your fault, that this is how we feel about nutrition. This is diet culture's fault. This is diet's fault. What I always like to say is that no one has ever taught us how to eat. People have only taught us how to diet. And that is the problem with the nutrition and fitness industry, in my opinion, because I think that learning these types of things is what is crucial for helping you actually feel better throughout the course of your day. And then I do also want to just touch a little bit, because not that I really care about it, but I know that everybody and their mom does. One big thing that we hear a lot is for insulin resistance, prediabetes, PCOS, type 2 diabetes is to lose weight, right? That's what everybody says. Oh, all you need to do is lose weight and cut carbs. Not the correct answer. That's a whole nother episode. But when we're thinking about these blood sugar levels spiking and crashing, like I mentioned, it can lead to increased cravings, specifically for sugary or simple carbohydrates, which can lead to overeating, because we think about these really highly palatable, simple carbohydrates. How much broccoli can you eat versus how many cupcakes can you eat, right? It's a lot easier to eat a lot of those cupcakes, especially when you are ravenous and haven't had enough fuel or energy throughout your day. And once again, this is not me saying that the broccoli is good and that the cupcakes are bad. It's me saying that the cupcakes are easier to eat a lot of. So you're likely going to end up eating far more of those cupcakes at night when you haven't provided your blood sugar, your metabolism, your hormones with the proper amount of food during the course of the day. And because those cupcakes are easier to eat and more calorically dense than something like broccoli or fruit or whole grains or beans and legumes, you're probably going to end up eating more calories in total at that end of the day than you would have if you would have provided yourself with a balanced day leading into that evening time, where then you feel like, okay, I feel pretty good. I had a balanced dinner. You know, I got in my protein, I got my carbs, I got my fats, I got my color. I feel really good, but like a sweet little treat. My friend Cassie says this, I've never met a girlie who doesn't love a sweet little treat. I want my sweet little treat after dinner. Because your blood sugar levels have been balanced all day and because you actually feel good, you're probably going to end up eating one cupcake, one cookie, one ice cream cone. You're not going to feel that excessive need to overindulge or binge on it because you have actually provided your body with what it needs throughout the course of the day. So when it comes to weight management, I think where we're missing the mark is that we're just telling people that you need to lose weight. We're not educating people on why they're feeling the need to overeat or overindulge at night. And it's related to these imbalanced blood sugar levels. Another really important thing, we talk a lot about inflammation on social media, and a lot of people like really don't know what they're talking about when it comes to inflammation. Like, let's just like say it how it is. There's only a couple of foods that we know that cause inflammation in the human body, because this is your gentle reminder. I say it on a lot of my podcasts, but you are not a rat, right? You are a high functioning human being, which is a different metabolism than what a rat is going to have. And so when we talk about the two things that we know can cause inflammation in the body, it's highly processed or ultra processed meats, and then it's also alcohol. And when we're talking about something that can impact inflammation within the body, another thing that can do that is high blood sugar levels. Now, once again, this is where I think we have miscommunication, because you will oftentimes see people on social media saying that as soon as I stopped eating added sugar, I had a huge reduction in inflammation, and I also had a huge reduction in sugar cravings. Once again, this is all tied back to blood sugar balance. It's not that the sugar is the culprit or the devil or causing major problems. It's the fact that when we have these chronically elevated high blood sugar levels because we haven't been given the education on how to eat to optimize our metabolism and our hormones, we are then left with these high circulating blood sugar levels that can lead to an increase in the production of something called free radicals. This can enhance our inflammatory markers, which can cause more oxidative stress in the body and inflammation, damaging the cells and tissues. And once again, if we're not increasing the variety of fruits and vegetables in our diets, for example, what we know about fruits and vegetables, which by the way are carbohydrates, and think about the amount of people that are scared to eat fruit of all things, because people on the internet say that sugar and carbohydrates are bad for you. That is absolutely not the case, because think about this. If we have these high circulating blood sugar levels, eating fruits and vegetables, they're high in antioxidants and polyphenols. You know what antioxidants and polyphenols do? They fight off these free radicals in our body and help to reduce oxidative stress and reduce inflammation. But we're fear-mongering people into thinking that they can't have fucking fruit. Do we see how this all ends up tying into each other? Okay, and then our metabolic efficiency. So I've said this numerous times that our metabolism thrives off of consistency, right? So like I mentioned beforehand, we have this metabolic rate where we burn a certain amount of calories at rest. For women, that's anywhere from 900 to 1,500 calories at rest to simply exist and survive. What we want to do in order to support our metabolism is make sure that we are eating enough total energy, make sure that we're eating the right balance of macronutrients, moving our body in ways that we enjoy, getting as much sleep that we can, and also managing our stress. But the reason that blood sugar levels are going to really have an impact on metabolic efficiency and the way in which our metabolism functions is because, like I said, when we're under eating and over exercising, or just simply even under eating, our metabolism is going to be out of freaking whack, because over or under eating can down regulate our metabolism, so it can slow it down. And the reason that it's slowing it down is because it's having to learn to do these physiological functions on a lower amount of energy. And you know what happens? It's going to prioritize specific functions over the other. So what's the primary thing that you need to exist and survive? Your lungs to be pumping and your heart to be beating. That is what your body is going to provide or prioritize in terms of energy usage. So if you are giving your body not nearly enough energy, other things that are normally functioning in this metabolic rate are going to be down-regulated. One of those being your hunger and satisfaction cues. When our hunger and satisfaction cues are lowered, it's really fucking hard to determine when we're actually feeling full and satisfied. This is why you might be someone who feels like during the week, I eat so clean, I eat so perfect, and I don't even feel that hungry. But then on the weekends, I feel like I'm out of control. I eat everything and I eat to the point of feeling uncomfortable. That is related to the fact that you have a down regulation in your satisfaction and fullness hormone. And you guys, it is not a bad thing to feel hunger. My goodness, if you are feeling hunger, that means that you have a high functioning metabolism. I saw a really funny meme the other day, like making fun of cheat days on the weekends. Like, oh, I gave myself a really nice cheat pee this past weekend. Peeing is a physiological function. When your bladder is full and you get the signal to pee, you go pee. When we get the signal for hunger, it's automatically this fear thing where we're like, let's chew gum, let's drink water, let's avoid this signal from our body that we need energy. And if you're like, Taylor, I'm in the opposite direction, I feel like I'm hungry all the damn time and I never feel full and satisfied, that is also related to an imbalance in blood sugar levels. Because although you might feel like you're eating all the time, you might not necessarily be balancing out those blood sugar levels to actually keep you full and satisfied by adding to your carbohydrates with protein, fat, and fiber. And our metabolism just thrives off of that consistency in that overall blood sugar level. When I tell you guys the difference in the way that I feel throughout the day, going from struggling with orthorexia and significantly under eating, and clearly my blood sugar levels were all over the fucking place. When I tell you the difference in that to now, I feel so much more metabolically healthy. I actually feel my hunger and fullness cues. I'm able to tell when I'm satisfied. And I don't like, yes, there are still some times where I overeat because intuitive eating is a practice and you're never going to be perfect at it. And there are times where I show up to a restaurant absolutely freaking ravenous and it's super hard for me to be mindful in that moment. Or like I get the munchies from a good old garden gummy and it's a little hard to tell what my satisfaction cues are. I'm not perfect, but the amount that I overeat now compared to when I was struggling with orthorexia and eating the least amount possible and exercising the most I ever have is astronomical. And the way that I've been able to put on muscle, like I can remember, because I love to tell this story, not for the sense of like a transformation story, but I think that something that I always thought about at that time, and this is how my brain used to work back then, okay? I don't think about exercise or blood sugar balance in the form of aesthetics now, but back then I would always think like, I am eating so little and I'm exercising so much and I don't even look like I work out. My face is inflamed. My body constantly feels inflamed. I bloat after every single meal and I just feel pretty terrible when I actually am exercising. I'm not putting on muscle. I don't understand what I'm doing wrong. What I was doing wrong was that I was not supporting my hormones or my metabolism by balancing out my blood sugar and eating enough total energy in the day. Now, I also want to touch a little bit on insulin resistance because I think this is something that we're seeing in social media a lot, and there's a lot of misconceptions about it. So at a super basic level, insulin resistance is a condition in which the cells in the body do not respond effectively to insulin. So remember how we said that insulin is what is needed in order for our cells to actually take the glucose out of the bloodstream, store them, and utilize them as energy. So what's happening when we're not responding to insulin as correctly, the cells in the muscle, fat, and liver tissue do not respond adequately to insulin and thus do not absorb sufficient glucose from the blood. What does that end up leading to? It leads to elevated levels of glucose. The pancreas initially tries to create more insulin to keep up with the demand, but at a certain point, your pancreas can't keep up with it anymore. This leads to an inability to actually regulate your blood sugar levels effectively, which can eventually lead to type 2 diabetes. So when we're talking about insulin resistance, one, it can be genetic. So that is something to kind of think about here as well. But I think that one of the biggest contributors to insulin resistance is this lack of understanding of balancing out our blood sugar levels. And when we talk about reversing type 2 diabetes or not getting diabetes when we're diagnosed with prediabetes, reversing insulin resistance, when we think about the habits that are actually associated with that, it's balancing out our blood sugar levels. And if we're also talking about ways to increase insulin sensitivity, exercise can increase the sensitivity of cells to insulin. So one big thing here too is that your muscles are actually going to contract and stimulate a mechanism that allows them to take up more glucose independent of insulin. This actually reduces the amount of insulin that's required to move glucose into the cells, which helps to lower blood glucose levels without your pancreas having to sputter out a shit ton of insulin. That's why it can lead to an increase in insulin sensitivity and a decrease in insulin resistance. So once again, another crazy benefit of exercise is increasing that insulin sensitivity, reducing that insulin resistance. That has nothing to do with weight loss specifically. Like if you are simply exercising, you are going to improve your blood sugar levels and your blood sugar balance. So finding a form of exercise that you enjoy is incredibly important. And the reason I talked about this a little bit at the beginning, but also increasing your muscle mass requires more energy because during physical activity, muscles need more energy and they obtain this energy from pulling that glucose from the bloodstream. The contraction of those muscles during exercise actually allows the muscles to take up as much glucose as possible without needing insulin. So once again, this is why having more muscle tissue is super important because your muscles can uptake more can uptake more, there's so many G words floating around in my head right now. It can uptake more glycogen to be utilized for energy at a later date. So once again, you're going to have more space for that glucose to actually go. Muscle, liver, that last resort is the adipose tissue. So the more muscle you have, the more you're going to be able to take up that glucose, reduce those blood sugar levels, and actually maintain a balanced blood sugar. So that is why it's incredibly important. Another really important thing with exercise is that after exercise, the body actually continues to increase or to experience an increased rate of glucose uptake in the muscles to help replenish your glycogen stores. So think about that. When we're exercising, we're utilizing that glycogen that we're storing in the muscle tissue, right? But at some point, we have to replenish that so that the next time that we exercise or the next time that we move our bodies, we're able to have more energy again. So this effect can actually last for up to 24 to 48 hours after exercise, which can help to keep your blood sugar levels more stable even when you're not actively working out. This is like literally when I say that this is why habits are something that is so important, and weight loss is not the answer that we think we're looking for when it comes to chronic disease and chronic condition, and why we need to be teaching about the benefits of nutrition and the benefits of exercise, the benefits of sleep and stress management, which I'm going to dive into a little bit before I end the podcast episode. This is exactly why. Like, how fucking cool is this, you guys? I love talking about the body. It's so cool to just like hear the way that our body actually utilizes and benefits from the food that we eat, because I think that something I've been saying a lot lately is the way in which we view food is so much like, how many calories are in this? How is it going to shrink my body? Like using food as a means for thinness rather than a means for beneficial things that it does for us. So I just love this, okay? I love it so much. And then I also want to talk about the physiological impact of stress on blood sugar, because I talk a lot about how the stress of dieting and the stress of food impacts our metabolism and our hormones in a negative way. But here is exactly how, okay? So when you are stressed out, specifically, well, I mean, just when you're stressed out in general, but like think about all of the daily life stressors that we already deal with, and then you tack being stressed about food in your body on top of that. When you are stressed, your body is going to release stress hormones such as cortisol and adrenaline, also known as epinephrine. These hormones are part of the body's fight or flight response and are designed to prepare the body to respond to perceived threat, okay? One way they do this is by increasing the availability of glucose in the bloodstream to provide quick levels of energy. Think about that, okay? We're getting glucose sputtered into our bloodstream when we might not even need it. That's going to increase the total amount of circulating glucose in your bloodstream. Once again, stress is such a key indicator when it comes to this fundamental blood sugar balance, because when we are so stressed out about not only life things, but also food, body, dieting, and I've told you the ways in which dieting can negatively impact our stress levels and our stress hormones, we think about how that's now impacting a rise in our blood sugar levels without us even eating more carbohydrates. Like, that is a prime example of why managing stress and why stress management is such a crucial habit in terms of blood sugar balance, nutrition, weight management, all of these things. Weight loss is not the fucking answer, you guys. It is stress management, it is understanding blood sugar balance, and it is learning to move your body in ways that you enjoy. So the release of these hormones during stress can cause a significant and immediate increase in our blood sugar levels. Because cortisol and adrenaline signal the liver to produce more glucose, it also causes the body's cells to become less sensitive to insulin. This reduces the uptake of glucose by the cells and results in higher blood sugar levels. Thus, literally stress could lead to insulin resistance. Chronic elevated levels of stress over a long period of time, like I am convinced that we have people out here on the internet saying that like bananas are the fucking cause of disease. It is not. It is this. It is stress, and it is the lack of understanding of blood sugar management. But now all of you are such smarty pants, and you're going to know how to balance your blood sugar levels a little bit better. So you're going to be feeling better every single day, and I love that for you. And then in terms of like, one other thing that I wanted to talk about with stress is also sleep. Because when we think about stress and anxiety and we talk about that fight or flight mode, when we're going to sleep, something that's important is the ignition of our parasympathetic nervous system. This is known as like our rest and digest portion of our nervous system. We have our fight or flight, or we have our rest and digest. We want to ignite that parasympathetic nervous system because it's going to help us to calm down, unwind, and just kind of fucking chill so we can actually go to sleep. But stress and anxiety can lead to difficulties in sleeping. So can blood sugar balance. If you are finding yourself that you're dieting or under eating and you're waking up every single night at 2 or 3 a.m. and you feel like you can't get back to sleep, that might be related to a plummet in your blood sugar levels, okay? So stress can lead to difficulties in sleep, such as trouble falling asleep or staying asleep. Poor sleep can affect the hormones that regulate appetite and blood sugar control. further complicating blood sugar management. This is also why I say sleep is the lowest hanging fruit. If you can start somewhere on your nutrition, health, and fitness journey and you don't know where to start, sleep is one of the first places that I recommend starting because it is one of the most crucial things when it comes to actually regulating those hunger and fullness cues, ghrelin and leptin. You may have noticed this before, like if you go through a night where if you're someone who sleeps pretty well normally and then you have a night of just shitty sleep, the next day you might feel more hungry. It might take longer to feel more satisfied or full. I always think about this on travel days because especially we try to leave on early flights when we're doing travel days and we'll get up at 3 or 4 a.m. I notice that I am so much hungrier on a travel day than what I would normally be. And I used to just think I've been up longer, so that's why. No, it's because I'm getting less sleep than I normally do. And that's disrupting my blood sugar balance. And it's also disrupting my hunger and fullness cues. So like I said, one of the best things that you can do in terms of your nutrition, health, and fitness journey is learn to understand this blood sugar balance from a super simple level. Also learn how to find ways that you can move your body in ways that you enjoy, whether that's cardiovascularly, and then also incorporating some sort of resistance training to help to increase your muscle mass, getting good quality sleep, and managing your stress. These are the four most important components to overall health. And as you can see, not a single one of them is weight loss. All of them are habits that you can start to form and do on a daily basis to help to optimize your metabolism and optimize your hormones. I know I have some males that listen to this as well, but I know it's mostly females, but optimize your hormones in general, but also just as a woman. This is the magic key. I'm telling you, this is the magic key that everybody is looking for. Everybody thinks the magic key is weight loss. The magic key is blood sugar balance. With all of this information, I've been wanting to make this episode for a long time, but it's also just coming at a really good time because my friend Cassie and I, who is a holistic health coach, are also launching a program called Master Your Metabolism, Nourish Without Numbers. The premise of this course is to literally teach you everything that I talked about today, but from a more personalized and individualized standpoint. We'll be talking blood sugar balance, we'll be talking hormone regulation, we'll be talking better habit building, sleep, stress management, guided meditations, 9 weeks of meal plans with grocery lists. There's literally so much information and resources packed into this group coaching program, and we're so freaking excited to run it. I'm going to put all of the information for that in the show notes, and also if you listen to this and you're like, Taylor, I'm super interested, feel free to just send me a DM and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. You can also send me an email if you want to as well. But whatever way you find is easiest to communicate, I am more than happy to answer any questions. It's going to start, I think it's May 5th or 6th. I can't remember. It's the first Monday of May. And we are so freaking excited for this program. And it's going to have so much of the information that I gave today, but like I said, on a more individualized and personalized level. So thank you so much for listening to this podcast. As you know, I'm so appreciative for all of you. I love you so much. Thank you for making this one of the best parts of my job. Thank you for allowing me to do this for a job. And thank you for continuing to listen, follow, engage. I love you all so much. And I am so grateful for this community. If you have any questions on Master Your Metabolism, Nourish Without Numbers, please feel free to send me a DM or an email, and I'm happy to answer those for you. But as always, thank you for being here. I love you and have a fantastic Tuesday. And that brings us to the end of today's episode of Simply Balanced. Thank you so much for tuning in and sharing a part of your day with me. I hope you find inspiration in our discussion and feel more equipped to embrace the balanced girl aesthetic in your daily life. Remember, balance is a journey, not a destination. It's about finding what works for you in your unique way. As we part ways, I encourage you to reflect on one thing you learned today and how you can incorporate that into your life to create more balance. Don't forget to subscribe to Simply Balanced so you never miss an episode. If you enjoyed our time together, consider leaving a review or sharing the podcast with a friend. Your support means the world, and until next time, keep striving for balance, nourish your body and mind, and remember to cherish life's simple pleasures. This is Taylor Grasso signing off. Stay balanced and see you next episode.